Two men stood in the middle of a wrestling ring in the summer of 1989, and to look at them was to look at the same idea reflected in two very different mirrors. Both of them wore paint on their faces. Both of them could fly. Both of them moved with a speed and a violence that the American audience had almost never seen before. One of them was the Sunshine, the brightly colored, spike-haired symbol of everything good and clean and hopeful about the future of the sport. The other was the Darkness, a silent, mysterious figure from the other side of the world who painted himself like a demon and spit a cloud of green poison into the eyes of anyone who dared to stand across from him. They were opposites in every possible way, and yet somehow they were exactly the same. Two sides of a single coin spun into the air, landing again and again over the course of one unforgettable year. For a few months in 1989, these two men fought each other more than 60 times in tiny high school gymnasiums, on national television, inside a cage with no door and a fire burning on the roof, and every single time they collided, something electric happened. Something that made grown men lean forward in their seats. Something that took a company on the edge of collapse and gave it a reason to believe again. This is the story of the rivalry between Sting and the Great Muta. A feud between good and evil, between the light and the dark. A feud that helped save a dying company, opened a door between two continents that had barely spoken to each other before, and elevated both men to a level that neither could have reached alone. In this video, we are going to tell you the entire story. How a young man from Japan named Keiji Muto reinvented himself as the most terrifying character American wrestling had ever seen. How a former bodybuilder from California became the franchise that an entire promotion would be built around. We will take you inside the controversial double pinfall finish in Baltimore that ended with a manager stealing the championship belt and walking out of the building with it. We will take you inside the cage in Philadelphia, where a fire broke out on the roof before the bell even rang. And we will show you the night in Atlanta when the whole thing came to an end and one man finally, decisively, proved that he was the future. But to understand why this rivalry mattered so much, you first have to understand where both of these men came from. And you have to understand just how much trouble their company was in. Let us go back to the beginning. In the late 1980s, the promotion that would eventually become World Championship Wrestling was in a fight for its very survival. For decades, the National Wrestling Alliance had been the backbone of American professional wrestling. A loose collection of regional territories, each with its own champions and its own stars, all united under one banner, but the world had changed. Vince McMahon and his company up in the Northeast had gone national. They had taken wrestling out of the smoky regional arenas and put it on cable television and closed circuit screens all across the country. They had turned it into a spectacle, and in doing so, they had begun to swallow the territories one by one. By 1989, the old NWA was a shadow of what it had once been. Jim Crockett had sold his promotion to Ted Turner, and it was now operating under the WCW name on Turner's television networks. The company had legends. It had Ric Flair, the greatest world champion in the history of the business. It had the Road Warriors, the most intimidating tag team the sport had ever produced. It had the Four Horsemen, the blueprint for every villainous faction that would ever follow. And it had a roster full of tough, proven veterans who could go out and have a great match on any given night. But there was a hole at the very center of all of it, because legends get older, because the men who had carried the company through the 70s and 80s could not carry it forever. What the company desperately needed was a face for the future, a young star that the next generation of fans could latch onto and grow up with, a symbol that this company could build the next 10 years around, a hero for the 90s, ready and waiting to lead the charge into a new decade. And they had found him. His name was Sting. The man behind the paint was born Steve Borden. He had come up through the bodybuilding world in Southern California, a gym rat with an incredible physique and almost no wrestling experience. He and a partner had broken into the business as a flashy tag team, all muscles and neon and energy, and at first, nobody expected much. He was a good-looking kid with a great body who could maybe learn to work a little. That was the ceiling most people put on him. But then came the night that changed everything. On March the 27th, 1988, at the very first Clash of the Champions, this young, relatively untested performer was placed across the ring from Ric Flair for the NWA World Heavyweight Championship. Flair was the measuring stick, the man who had carried 1,000 pretenders to good matches and then sent them back to the mid-card where they belonged. Nobody expected the kid to hang with him. Nobody expected him to do anything but get exposed. And instead, the two men wrestled for 45 minutes, a full time limit draw. And by the end of it, the crowd was on its feet, screaming for the young challenger, absolutely convinced that they had just watched a star be born right in front of their eyes, because they had. Sting did not win the title that night, but he won something more valuable. He won the belief of an entire audience. From that moment forward, the company knew what they had. They had lightning in a bottle. They had a young man with charisma that leapt off the screen, a body that looked like it was chiseled out of granite, and a connection with the crowd that simply could not be taught. Children loved him. Women loved him. Men respected him. He was the total package. By the spring of 1989, Sting had captured the NWA World Television Championship, and the company was carefully, deliberately building him toward the top of the mountain. He was the chosen one, the franchise player, the man they were going to hand the keys to, but there was a problem. A star is only as good as the opponents he has to overcome, and to truly make Sting, to truly cement him as the future, the company needed someone special to test him against, someone new, someone the audience had never seen before, someone who could match his athleticism, mirror his intensity, and provide a contrast so stark that their battles would feel like something out of mythology. That someone was about to arrive from the other side of the planet, and nobody in America had any idea what was coming. His real name was Great Muta. He had been born in Japan and had come up through one of the toughest training systems in the entire sport. Before he ever set foot in a wrestling ring, Muta had been a serious athlete, a standout in amateur wrestling, and a talented judo competitor. When he entered the legendary New Japan Pro Wrestling dojo, he brought that athletic foundation with him, and that dojo was no ordinary training ground. It was one of the most brutal, unforgiving finishing schools in the entire sport. A place designed to break young men down and rebuild them into hardened professionals. A place where only the toughest and most dedicated survived. Muto did not just survive it, he thrived. He quickly distinguished himself as one of the most naturally gifted young performers anyone in Japan had seen in years. A prodigy who seemed to absorb everything and forget nothing. He could do things that big men were not supposed to be able to do. He could throw drop kicks that looked like they belonged to a lightweight. He could climb to the top rope and float through the air with a grace that defied his size. And in a business that was still largely built around slow, ground-based, methodical brawling, Muto was something from the future, a glimpse of what professional wrestling was going to become. But before he could conquer the world, Muto had to learn his craft the hard way, and that meant excursions. In the Japanese system, young wrestlers are sent overseas to sharpen their skills, to work in front of foreign crowds, to become men, and so Keiji Muto went on a journey that took him all across the Americas, wearing a series of different masks and personas, honing the character that would eventually make him a legend. In Florida, he wrestled as the White Ninja, and he was good enough to capture a regional heavyweight championship. In Puerto Rico and in Texas, he wrestled under a hood as the Super's Black Ninja, feuding with members of the famous Von Erich family. He was a mysterious martial artist, a silent assassin, but he was still searching for the identity that would set him apart from every other Japanese wrestler who had ever come to America. And then he met Gary Hart. Gary Hart was one of the greatest managers in the history of the business, a cold, calculating, silver-haired villain who spoke softly and radiated menace. And years earlier, Hart had guided the career of another Japanese wrestler who had captivated and terrified American audiences, a face-painted mystic named the Great Kabuki, who had introduced the American wrestling world to Asian mysticism, ceremonial face paint, and a cloud of mysterious poison mist that he would spray into the faces of his enemies. Hart looked at Keiji Muto and he saw the future. He saw a chance to take everything that had made Kabuki special and to supercharge it with the athleticism of a younger, faster, more explosive man. And so when Muto signed with the NWA, Gary Hart reinvented him completely. He gave him elaborate, otherworldly face paint. He draped him in exotic ceremonial costumes. He taught him the ancient art of the poison mist. And then he introduced him to the world under a brand new name, billing him as the son of the very man he had managed all those years ago. They called him the Great Muta. When Muta first appeared on national television in the spring of 1989, the American audience had no frame of reference for what they were watching. He would emerge in a hooded robe, his face hidden, and then he would remove the hood to reveal a hideous painted mask that made him look like something summoned from a nightmare. He barely spoke, he let Gary Hart do the talking, and in the ring, he was a revelation. He would climb to the top rope and hit a moonsault, a backflip splash that no heavyweight in America was doing at the time, and it looked absolutely picture perfect every single time. He would launch himself into handspring elbows, cartwheeling across the ring before crashing into his opponent, and most memorably of all, he would fill his mouth with a mysterious substance and, at the perfect moment, spray a thick cloud of glowing green mist directly into the eyes of his victims, blinding them, leaving them helpless. The fans did not know what to make of him. He was a villain. Yes, he was aligned with the hated Gary Hart, and he cheated and he used that poison to blind good, honest wrestlers. But there was something about him that was so cool, so different, so impossibly exciting that even as they were supposed to boo him, they could not help but be drawn to him. He did not look like anyone else. He did not move like anyone else. He was the physical embodiment of the unknown, a creature from a wrestling culture that most Americans had never even glimpsed. And that mystery was intoxicating. Some fans in the arenas even brought signs celebrating him, hailing him as the Pearl of the Orient. He was a heel that people secretly wanted to see, and that made him exactly the kind of opponent who could bring the best out of a rising hero. He tore through the lower part of the roster, dismantling one hapless opponent after another, building an aura of invincibility. He was undefeated, he was untouchable, and it quickly became clear that the company was building him toward one man. The one man whose light was bright enough to challenge his darkness. They were building him towards Sting, and so the stage was set. On one side, the golden child of American wrestling, the neon-painted symbol of hope and energy and the future. On the other, the silent demon from Japan, the poison-spitting mystic who moved like a phantom and struck like a snake, good against evil, light against dark, west against east. The only thing left was for them to finally collide. The first time Sting and the Great Muta ever locked up was not on a grand stage in front of millions of viewers. It happened on April the 23rd, 1989 in a house show in Huntington, West Virginia. No cameras, no pay-per-view, just a live crowd in a regional arena watching two of the most gifted athletes in the world feel each other out for the very first time. That first match ended in a disqualification with Sting getting the win, but not a clean one. And that would become the theme of everything to come, because from the very first moment these two men touched, it was obvious that they had something rare, something that could not be manufactured or forced. They had chemistry. Everything just clicked. Sting's speed matched Muta's speed. Sting's high flying matched Muta's high flying. When one man went to the top rope, the other could counter. When one man tried a martial arts kick, the other could duck it. They moved like they had been wrestling each other their entire lives, anticipating one another, feeding off one another, raising each other higher and higher with every single exchange. For the next 3 months, the company sent them on the road together, running the same match in town after town, letting them build and refine and perfect what they had. This was the old school way of doing things, the way stars had been forged for generations. You did not create a great match in one night on television. You created it out on the road in front of live crowds who paid their hard-earned money to see it, learning a little more each night about what worked and what did not, about when to speed up and when to slow down, about how to make an audience gasp, and then how to make them roar. Night after night, in city after city, Sting and the Great Muta went to war. And every single night they got a little bit better. They learned each other's timing until they could practically read each other's minds. And with every performance, the buzz grew louder. Word began to spread through the locker room and out into the crowds that these two were doing something special together. And it was only a matter of time before the entire country got to see it. That moment came on July the 23rd, 1989. The event was called the Great American Bash, subtitled Glory Days, and it emanated from Baltimore, Maryland. It was one of the biggest shows of the year, and Sting was defending his television championship against the Great Muta in what would be their first ever televised singles encounter. This was the match the build-up had been leading toward. This was the moment the audience had been waiting for. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Smoke filled the air, and the ceremonial sound of a gong echoed through the building as the Great Muta made his way to the ring, draped in his exotic costume with the cold and calculating Gary Hart walking beside him. Then came the champion, Sting, exploding out to a rousing ovation from the Baltimore faithful, accompanied by the manager Hot Stuff Eddie Gilbert. Before the bell, Sting even spoke about the genuine respect he held for his opponent, about how well the two of them matched up. But everyone watching knew that any respect between them would be thrown out the window the instant the action began. The arena that night had two rings set up side by side because the main event was going to be a War Games match inside a double cage, and Sting and Muta used that unusual setup to create one of the most iconic images of the entire rivalry. As the match began, Muta tried to psych out his opponent by starting in the ring beside the one where Sting was waiting, and Sting responded by sprinting across the ring, leaping over the ropes, and flying through the air from one ring into the other to attack his rival. The crowd exploded. It was the kind of moment that lets you know instantly that you are watching something big. What followed was 8.5 minutes of pure, breathless action. It was worked like a heavyweight title fight, urgent and violent and dramatic from the opening bell. Sting came out on fire, but Gary Hart, ever the schemer, distracted him from ringside long enough for Muta to seize control. The Great Muta went to work with his arsenal of kicks and strikes and aerial assaults, wearing down the champion, tearing at his head and his neck and his ribs. But Sting would not stay down. He fought back, matching the challenger move for move, and the two men traded the advantage back and forth in a way that had the Baltimore crowd on the edge of their seats. Sting even showed off his incredible power, hoisting Muta up and slamming him to the mat, reminding everyone that beneath all the flash, he was one of the strongest men in the company. And then came the finish. The controversial, chaotic, unforgettable finish that would define this entire chapter of the feud. Muta went for his poison mist, that green cloud that had blinded so many opponents, but Sting ducked out of the way, and the mist caught the referee full in the face, blinding the official instead. With the referee incapacitated, Muta climbed to the top rope and hit his beautiful moonsault, crashing down onto Sting for what looked like a certain victory. A second referee, the veteran Tommy Young, sprinted down to the ring to make the count. But because of the delay, Sting was able to kick out at the last possible instant. Then Sting struck back. He hit a back suplex, bridging his own shoulders up off the mat as he pinned Muta's shoulders down. Tommy Young dropped and counted to 3, and Sting was declared the winner, retaining his championship, or so it seemed, because Gary Hart was not finished. He climbed onto the apron and began screaming that the finish was tainted. He insisted that Muta's shoulder had been up before the 3 count, and when the replay was shown, it revealed something remarkable. Both men had a shoulder off the mat during that final pinfall. It was, quite literally, a double pin. There was no clear winner. In the confusion, Gary Hart did something audacious. As Sting was getting to his feet, Hart grabbed the championship belt, and he and the Great Muta simply walked out of the arena with the title in their possession. The ending was a mess of controversy and chaos, and it left the entire situation completely unresolved. Who was the real champion? Nobody knew. Eventually, officials made the only decision they could. The title was held up, vacated. Neither Sting nor the Great Muta would be recognized as the television champion. The belt was frozen, and the two rivals would have to fight for it all over again, and fight they did. Over the following month, Sting and the Great Muta faced each other with a frequency that is almost impossible to imagine in the modern era. In the span of just 31 days, the two men wrestled one another no fewer than 13 times. 13 matches in a single month, each one a war, each one raising the stakes a little bit higher, and it was during that grueling stretch on September the 3rd, 1989, that the Great Muta finally got what he had been chasing. He defeated Sting to capture the vacant NWA World Television Championship. The demon from Japan had taken the gold. The silent assassin had toppled the golden boy, and he would hold that championship for the next 4 months, a run that cemented him as one of the most important villains in the entire company. But this rivalry was always bigger than one championship. And as the calendar turned toward autumn, it began to fold into something even larger. Because Gary Hart was not just managing the Great Muta, he was building an entire faction of villains, a stable of ruthless outsiders he called the J-Tex Corporation. And that faction included one of the most legitimately dangerous and unhinged men in the history of the sport, the middle-aged, wild-eyed madman from the Texas Plains, Terry Funk. Funk had recently declared war on Ric Flair, viciously attacking the world champion and even pile-driving him onto a ringside table in one of the most talked-about angles of the year. And so, in a twist that no one saw coming, the two greatest rivals in the company found themselves on the same side. Sting and Ric Flair, the young lion and the aging king, the very two men who had wrestled that legendary 45-minute draw, banded together as allies, united by a common enemy, united against the J-Tex Corporation. On September the 12th, 1989, at Clash of the Champions, Sting and Ric Flair teamed up to battle the Great Muta and Dick Slater, who was substituting for the injured Terry Funk. Muta and Sting started the match against one another, and once again the magic was there. The two of them could not help but bring out the best in each other, no matter what the circumstances. The match was fast and physical and brutal, with all four men eventually spilling to the floor and pairing off. But it was the ending that made history, and not for reasons the company was happy about. In the chaos, the Great Muta blinded Sting with his mist, taking him out of the equation. And with Flair now isolated and vulnerable, Terry Funk came storming down to ringside, grabbed a plastic bag, and pulled it over the world champion's head, trying to suffocate him right there in front of the cameras. It was a shockingly dark and realistic moment, the kind of thing that crossed the line between wrestling storyline and genuine assault, and it was hard to watch, even for fans who thought they had seen everything. So dark, in fact, that it reportedly horrified the executives at the Turner Network who were watching from their offices, and caused real concern about just how far the company was willing to go to shock its audience. There were conversations behind the scenes about whether the angle had gone too far. But whatever the cost in nervous phone calls from the network, it did exactly what it was designed to do. It sent the heat between Flair and Funk into the stratosphere. It made the audience desperate to see the villains get what was coming to them. And it set the stage for one of the wildest, most unforgettable matches of the entire year. A match built around the very cage designed to trap these monsters and finally make them pay. That match would take place at Halloween Havoc. On October the 28th, 1989, the company presented its first ever Halloween Havoc, subtitled Settling the Score. And the main event was designed to be a spectacle unlike anything the audience had seen before. Sting and Ric Flair would team up to face the Great Muta and Terry Funk inside a structure called the Thunderdome, a massive cage that covered the entire ring with no door and no way out. The only way the match could end was for one team's designated cornerman, their so-called Terminator, to throw in the towel and surrender. And to add even more prestige to the occasion, the special guest referee was one of the most beloved living legends in the history of the sport. The former champion, the man who had sold out Madison Square Garden more times than anyone could count. Bruno Sammartino himself was inside that cage to officiate, and the whole thing had an epic, almost apocalyptic feel to it. And then, before the match even began, something happened that no one could have scripted. A small fire broke out on the top of the cage, real flames flickering above the ring. And in a moment of pure, improvised genius that perfectly captured the character of the Great Muta, he tilted his head back and sprayed a stream of his mist up toward the flames, as if the demon from Japan was using his supernatural powers to extinguish the fire himself. The match that followed was a brutal, exhausting war. 4 of the toughest men in the company trapped inside a cage with no escape, beating each other from one side of the structure to the other. Sting and Muta renewed their personal rivalry inside the steel, with Sting once again showcasing his incredible strength, at one point hoisting the Great Muta high over his head for what felt like an eternity before pressing him to the mat. The men climbed the cage. They battled while suspended in the air. They fought until they could barely stand. At one point, Sting was tied to the cage, helpless, while the veteran Ole Anderson worked frantically to free him. When he finally got loose, Sting climbed to the very top of the structure and launched himself off, flying down into the ring onto Terry Funk. He hit splash after splash from the top rope. Flair locked Funk in his patented figure 4 leg lock, and the Great Muta, in his desperation, even tried to strike the legendary Bruno Sammartino, only for the old lion to clear him out of the ring with ease. The finish came in a burst of chaos. As Gary Hart tried to interfere and break up Flair's submission hold, Ole Anderson struck him, causing Hart to accidentally drop the towel that belonged to the villain's corner. And when Bruno Sammartino saw that towel hit the floor, he interpreted it as a surrender and called for the bell, awarding the match to Sting and Ric Flair. Once again, the finish was drenched in controversy. Once again, there was a question of whether the losing side had really given up, but the message was clear. The forces of good had triumphed over the darkness of the J-Tex Corporation, and Sting, standing tall inside that cage alongside Ric Flair, looked more like a top star than ever before. But the story of Sting and the Great Muta was not quite finished. There was one more chapter to write, and it would be the most important one of all, because it was the chapter where the future of the company would finally be decided, once and for all. The setting was Starrcade, the single biggest show on the calendar. The event took place on December the 13th, 1989 at the Omni in Atlanta, Georgia, and it was subtitled Future Shock. And this year, the company tried something completely different. Instead of building the night around one or two marquee matches, the entire show was structured around 2 round-robin tournaments, one for tag teams and one for singles competitors. The singles tournament, called the Iron Man Tournament, featured the 4 biggest stars in the company: Ric Flair, the world champion; Lex Luger, the powerful United States champion; the Great Muta, the television champion; and Sting, 4 men, each one facing all 3 of the others over the course of the night. Points awarded for every victory, and at the end of the evening, the man with the most points would be crowned the Iron Man, the best of the best. For the company, this tournament was a statement of intent. It was a chance to definitively rank their top stars, to show the audience exactly where everyone stood on the ladder heading into the new decade, and the man they chose to stand at the very top of that ladder was Sting. Over the course of the night, Sting rose to the occasion, and when it came time for him to face the Great Muta one more time in the setting that mattered most, on the biggest stage of the year, Sting finally got the clean, decisive victory that had eluded him through all those months of controversial finishes and stolen belts and blinding mist. There was no cheating, no interference that mattered, no held-up championship, just Sting, pinning the Great Muta's shoulders to the mat. 1, 2, 3. When the final points were tallied, Sting had won the Iron Man tournament with 40 points. He had beaten the best the company had to offer, and the Great Muta, the man who had arrived as an undefeated, untouchable phantom just months earlier, finished the tournament in last place. 0 points, 3 losses, 2 of them by clean pinfall. The symbolism could not have been clearer. Here was the man who had arrived as an unstoppable, undefeated phantom, the mysterious import who had blinded and dismantled everyone in his path. And here, at the end of the year, on the grandest stage the company had, he was made to lie flat on his back and stare up at the lights while the referee's hand slapped the mat 3 times. The order of things had been established, the hierarchy had been drawn, and at the very top of it stood the man with the neon paint and the spiked hair. It was a passing of the torch, plain and simple. The demon from Japan had served his purpose. He had come to America, mystified the audience, elevated Sting through months of incredible matches, and now, in the final act, he laid down for the future of the company one last time. The Great Muta had helped make Sting a star, and in that Atlanta ring, in front of the whole wrestling world, Sting proved that the investment had paid off. He was ready. He was the future. Within weeks, the Great Muta's time in America was over. He dropped the television championship to Arn Anderson in the early days of January 1990, and shortly after Clash of the Champions in February, he packed up his mist and his moonsault and returned home to Japan. He had been a regular in the company for less than a single year. Think about that. Everything he did, all the chaos and the controversy and the unforgettable matches, all of it happened in the span of about 10 months. And yet, the impression he left was so deep, so permanent, that American fans would remember him forever. For the next 3 decades, whenever Keiji Muto brought the Great Muta character back for a special appearance, Crowds on both sides of the Pacific would erupt at the sight of that painted face. The character became one of the most influential and beloved in the entire history of the sport, imitated by countless wrestlers who came after him. But the true legacy of this rivalry goes even deeper than the two men who fought it, because the arrival of the Great Muta and his war with Sting did something that changed the shape of the entire industry. It opened a door. Before Muta, the connection between American wrestling and Japanese wrestling was distant. The two worlds barely touched. But Muta's success in America and the incredible matches he had with Sting strengthened the relationship between the two companies enormously. It proved that a Japanese star could come to the United States and become a genuine main event attraction, not a novelty act, but a legitimate draw that fans would pay to see. That door, once open, never closed. In the years that followed, a whole wave of Japanese talent poured into American wrestling, bringing their revolutionary, fast-paced, high-flying style with them and changing the way American fans thought about what a wrestling match could be. Stars like Masahiro Chono, like Kensuke Sasaki, like the incomparable Masked Marvel, Jushin Thunder Liger, all found their way onto American television and played major roles in the years that followed, each one walking through a door that the Great Muta had kicked open. The influence rippled outward for decades. The style that Muta introduced, the moonsaults and the handspring maneuvers and the breathtaking aerial offense, would eventually become the foundation of an entire division of lighter, faster wrestlers who would light up arenas throughout the 90s. And the two companies would continue to trade talent and co-promote massive shows for years, including spectacular events in the great dome stadiums of Japan in front of tens of thousands of screaming fans. In fact, the story of Sting and Muta was not even truly over. Years later, in a beautiful twist, the two longtime rivals actually set aside their differences and teamed up together, facing common opponents in front of enormous crowds, including at a co-promoted super show in the Tokyo Dome. The good and the evil, the light and the dark, finally standing side by side. They would even cross paths again in the ring nearly a decade later, though by then time had moved on and those later encounters never recaptured the pure electric magic of what they had created together in 1989. Because that was the year, that was the moment, that brief, brilliant window when everything aligned, when a struggling company needed a hero and found one in a neon-painted symbol of hope. When that hero needed a monster to slay and found one in a poison-spitting demon from across the sea. When two men who were opposites in every way discovered that they were, in the ways that mattered most, exactly the same. Sting himself has spoken about it many times over the years, always with obvious affection. He has said how much he loved working with Muta, how the two of them were close to the same size, how they had that rare and precious thing called chemistry, how they could put an entire match together between themselves and know that it was going to be great, whether it was in the United States or in the Tokyo Dome or anywhere else in the world. He has said that whatever the setting, he and Muta could figure out the entire match between the two of them, that they trusted each other completely, and that even when Gary Hart needed to add a little wrinkle here or there, it only ever made the finished product better. He speaks about it the way an artist speaks about a perfect collaboration, with warmth and gratitude and a clear understanding that lightning like that does not strike twice. Because that is what it was. The genius of the whole thing was in the contrast. Sting was the sun, all bright colors and boundless energy and heroic light. Muta was the shadow, all cold silence and creeping menace and supernatural dread. Put them next to each other and each one made the other more vivid, more powerful, more real. The light was brighter because of the darkness. The darkness was deeper because of the light. They were the perfect foils, and together they told one of the great stories in the history of the business. The individual matches, if you go back and watch them now, are sometimes shorter than you might remember. The famous Great American Bash Encounter lasted less than 9 minutes, but that is part of what made them so special. These two men understood that a great match is not about how long you go, it is about how much you make the audience feel. And in those compressed, urgent, action-packed collisions, they made the audience feel everything. The company got exactly what it needed. It got a young start it could build around for the next decade, and Sting would indeed go on to become the heart and soul of the promotion, its most loyal and beloved figure, the franchise player who stayed through boom and bust, through good management and bad, through every twist and turn the company would take over the following years. While bigger names came and went, chasing bigger paychecks in bigger places, Sting remained. He became the standard bearer, the conscience of the company, the one constant in a business that was constantly changing. And the foundation for all of it, the moment the audience first truly believed he could carry the weight of an entire promotion on his shoulders, was built in those matches against the Demon from Japan. He never left even when everyone else did. And it got proof that its future could be bright, that the loss of the territories did not have to mean the end. The Great Muta got something too. He got his American legend. He arrived a mystery and left an icon. He took everything he learned in those 10 chaotic months and he carried it back to Japan, where he built one of the greatest careers the sport has ever seen. A career that would eventually land him in multiple halls of fame and cement him as one of the true immortals of professional wrestling. And the sport itself got the beginning of something bigger than either man. A bridge between two continents. A blending of two styles. A glimpse of the global, high-flying, athletic future that professional wrestling was about to become. All of it born from one rivalry. 1 year, two painted faces staring at each other across a ring, each one a perfect reflection of the other. It is remarkable when you step back and think about it, how much came out of so little time. 10 months, a few dozen matches, a handful of unforgettable images, and yet the ripples spread across continents and across decades, touching careers and companies and entire styles of wrestling that would not exist in the same form without it. That is the strange alchemy of professional wrestling at its very best. When the right two performers find each other at the right moment, when the chemistry is real and the timing is perfect, they can create something that outlives them both, something that becomes legend, good and evil, light and darkness, east and west. Sting and the Great Muta, they only truly feuded for a single unforgettable year, but that year echoed for decades. And to this day, when longtime fans talk about the matches that made them fall in love with the art form, when they talk about the moment they realized professional wrestling could be beautiful and dangerous and mythic all at the same time, this is one of the rivalries they come back to. The sunshine and the shadow, the hero and the demon, the two sides of the same shining coin. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the most underrated rivalries in wrestling history, do us a favor and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more hard-hitting wrestling documentaries. Let us know down in the comments which classic feud you want us to cover next. And until next time, thanks for watching.